All right, time to start today's webinar, 24 Hours of Wellbeing, using data to build a more resilient workforce. Welcome everybody. Greetings from Jyväskylä, Finland. We had our first snow this year. There was not much, but the ground was white and the roads were all icy this morning, so winter is definitely coming here. I'm Tiina Hoffman from First Beat, and I was planning on having a guest whose result we were going to be discussing at the end of the session, but unfortunately he had to cancel in the last minute. So you will just be listening to me today during the session. Because of that, the session might be a bit shorter than I had originally planned. We had booked 45 minutes for this one, but I think we might be done already about 35 minutes, depending on how many questions you have in the end. So you might end up getting a free extra break into your day to go do a little stretching or maybe a nice little 10-minute walk outside when we are done at the end. The Q&A box is open, so you can write questions in there or comments, and I will take a look at that at the end of the session. So I'll go through the presentation and then I'll answer questions in the end. And I welcome you to send questions if you have on any topic. And the session is also recorded, so that you will get the podcast later on in case you have to leave early, for example. And I thought I would do a quick introduction of myself and First Beat because we do have quite a few brand new listeners who don't know us yet. So I'm Tiina from First Beat. I'm an exercise physiologist by training, and I have been working as a master trainer and expert here at First Beat for over 16 years today. So a real long timer here. And before my time at First Beat, I worked about a decade in different applied research projects at the University of Jyväskylä and Research Institute for Olympic Sports. We were studying, for example, overtraining in athletes, and that kind of led me into this area of trying to detect overload and then gradually transition into First Beat from that. And if I go way back into my younger years, I started my career as a ski coach. I was a ski racer. I moved from Finland to Alaska when I was young and worked many years as a ski coach, including 4 years as the Nordic ski coach at the University of Alaska. So my roots are in sports, but now I have worked in the area of performance and well-being of regular people for a long time. And as the picture kind of shows, my go-to method for managing my own stress and resilience is to go outside wherever I can. I enjoy hiking and kayaking and skiing to this day. And today's topic and the data that I'll be talking about, I find it also personally very interesting. For example, sleep is a challenge area for me, and I do quite a few measurements on myself to learn more about my own physiology. And then just a few words about First Beat. Certainly, if you are new, I encourage you to go to our website and go through that. There is a lot of information about our scientific background, some articles and things that you can find there. But we have been working in this area of measuring heartbeats and developing technology for physiological measurements for over 20 years today. We are a real pioneer in this area. We work in wellness services and elite sports. Over 1,000 wellness professionals today use First Beat Live as part of their own service offering, and over 1,000 elite sports team use the First Beat Sports Solution to improve the performance of their athletes and give more insight and information to the coach to allow optimal training. Our specialty is developing professional solutions to optimize performance in sports coaching and in wellness services. And yeah, visit our website if you want to read more about our background. And the agenda for today's session, I'll start off with a little bit about stress, what stress is, and why does it matter? Why do we keep talking about stress? Why it's important to understand it? And then I'll introduce First Beat Live. For those of you who are already working with First Beat Live, this will be a little bit of a review, but maybe a few new angles for you as well. How we sort of go from accurate heart rate variability data to talking about stress and recovery. And then in line with today's topic, I'll be sharing different examples from First Beat data to highlight the importance of having this kind of a 24-hour view into well-being. It's not enough to talk about stress at work or stressful moments because those things will happen, but what added value this kind of a 24-hour window into a person's life will give to coaches and to individuals. And then I'll finish up with a little bit of talk about resilience and different aspects of that. And then Q&A in the end, and I'm looking forward to getting some good tough questions from you guys. So let's get going with today's session. In principle, when we talk about stress, it's a very natural physiological reaction. It elevates the body's activation level and energy. It's sort of that familiar fight or flight response to some level that helps us prepare for a fight or prepare for us to meet the different demands of the day. It improves performance in the short term, and it very much belongs to life. Whether you are giving a presentation on stage like in the picture here, or doing a webinar, or dealing with the demands of a large family, or whatever those kind of things are, they typically cause some kind of stress reactions. We don't have to worry about it, but at the same time, it's good to keep in mind that excessive chronic stress, if it goes on week after week all the time, that starts to weaken our well-being and performance. It wears down our immunity, so a stressed person gets sick more easily, and it makes us susceptible to physical and mental health problems. Quite strong research correlations between chronic stress and many different kind of health problems. So in that way, we definitely do need to take it seriously, and I'll show a few statistics on the next slide. Psychologically, stress could be characterized as a situation where the demands that a person is faced with are greater than the resources that they have available. So that feeling where you have more things to do than you have time to do, or more things that you have skill to do. So that kind of an imbalance between what's expected of a person and what they have a capacity to deal with. And if that situation goes on in a long time, it starts to cause problems with chronic stress reaction. Key in a simple way to stress management, it's not to eliminate or get rid of stress, but how to learn to deal with stress and ensure recovery. And that's what the focus today really very much will be, to look at different kinds of stress reactions and stressful days, and then what the recovery tells about that. I looked at a few statistics just about stress, and there is so much out there that it was difficult to pin it down, but I took these few studies from the UK, from a survey that was done a couple of years ago, and just a few highlights from that. In the past year, the survey found that 74% of the people had felt so stressed, at least at some time, that they felt overwhelmed or unable to cope with those demands. 51% of adults who reported stressed reported that they were also feeling depressed, and 61% reported anxious feelings. So stress clearly associated or correlated with those kind of mental health states and problems. Physical, of course, as well. And then unhealthy lifestyle choices, that there's a very strong correlation that if we have a higher level of stress or too much stress, we are less likely to make good lifestyle decisions. 46% reported that due to stress, they either ate too much or they ate in an unhealthy way, in a way they didn't have the energy to make those good eating decisions. 29% reported that they started drinking or increased their drinking, and 16% that they started smoking or increased their smoking to help deal with stress. So very unfortunate and negative connections and associations with the ways people tend to deal with stress, exactly the opposite of what we should be doing. And that's clearly an area of work for all of us who work in this area. Then First Beat Life, what it is and what does that have to do with stress? It's a professional tool for stress measurements, and we start with this device that you can see here, First Beat Bodyguard 3. It's a very accurate, professional grade accurate sensor that measures every heartbeat and analyzes heart rate variability in regular daily life. It's typically worn a minimum of 24 hours at a time, usually 3 to 5 days at a time, all day and all night. It measures every heartbeat and analyzes heart rate variability, the variation in time between consecutive heartbeats. And from that, they then convert this kind of heart rate variability information into practical, real-life insights about stress and recovery, about sleep, about physical activity. So we sort of go beyond the heart rate variability data into insights that a client, regular person, can understand and that mean something to them in the context of their own life. I'll be showing several examples of what that kind of data might look like. And then what differentiates First Beat Life from typical wearable devices that a client might buy for themselves and use to track different aspects of their lifestyle is that we've created a professional portal, First Beat Life admin portal, that helps if you are a coach or a professional who works with clients. You can track all your clients' progress and streamline all your projects in this tool. You create projects and groups, you start the measurements there. You can see each of your clients' individual results there, which allows you to provide effective coaching for them from their result. And then also you can create group reports if you're working with corporate groups, for example. So it's a tool for you as a professional to help manage all your clients and make it possible for you to provide coaching on their result. And of course, we also provide training for the professionals so they know how to use the tool and know how to interpret the results. At this point, I'm actually going to take a quick poll because I'm curious to know how many of you have experience with measuring stress and measuring with First Beat Live. So there should be 2 questions in the poll. You can answer that. Do you measure your own stress level with some device? Yes or no? And then have you made a First Beat Live measurement on yourself? Yes or no? Just give it a few moments and I'll see what the percentages are. Overwhelming majority clearly measures their stress with something. 79% currently are saying yes, they measure their own stress level with some device. It is very, very common these days, and a lot of wearable devices also are providing this feature. 53%, so just over half, have actually made a First Beat Live measurement on themselves. So that's really good to know. So for those of you who already know that, you'll probably see some familiar colors. And for those who haven't done that, hopefully you'll get some new interesting information that you are going to be then hoping to be used in your work. Thank you everyone for participating. So let's go on from that. So this is a typical 24-hour First Beat Live graph with the colors that you will become very familiar when you get to know First Beat Live. The red color meaning stress, but it means both positive and negative stress reactions. It means that the sympathetic part of the nervous system active, some kind of a flight or flight response is going on. Heart rate is elevated, heart rate variability is lower compared to each individual's own baseline. And the green color, on the other hand, means recovery. It means higher heart rate variability, lower heart rate, the parasympathetic part of the nervous system is active. And that already kind of explains that both of them are normal states that belong to life. We don't differentiate between good or bad stress because physiologically it's very challenging to do because the reaction is the same in the body. Whether it's a positive cause or negative cause, it causes activation in the body. And that's why the context of the measurement and understanding what was happening on that day is important. For example, from this graph, it would be very difficult for me to say that was this a good day or a bad day? What kind of things were happening? I can see that the person got good recovery during night, so that's definitely positive. I don't see any green during the day, but then when I start understanding what was happening, it's easier for me and the client to make conclusions from that. Here's a really traditional, typical stress reaction in the morning. You can see the highest stress peak all day is here in the morning, and that turned out to be an argument with spouse. So classic stress reaction that elevates the heart rate and causes a stress response in the body. You can see very similar high red stress peaks in the evening here, several of them sort of over a period of a couple of hours. That turned out being the person watching a football game of their favorite team, Premier League team, and that team was winning. So those stress peaks actually more or less correspond when the team was scoring or something exciting was happening. So in this case, it was a very positive experience for that person, but it caused similarly high stress reactions as an argument with the spouse did. And then one more example from this day. In the afternoon here, there was some kind of a team workshop where they were creating and coming up with new ideas and sort of brainstorming some kind of concepting. You can see that also that shows up as stress, kind of a lower level of stress. The height of the red bar is a lot lower there. That's very normal. It still means some kind of focus and activation, but these are the types of details that we usually then get into when we discuss with clients or when we try to interpret the data, is that what was actually happening on that day. And we could say on a general level that positive stress in general does not prevent recovery. Like in this case, if it's a kind of stress that the person is handling and managing well, they are capable of recovering when it's time for that, in this case during sleep. Whereas if it's excessive overload or too much pressure, then that tends to keep the body wired even during sleep and prevent recovery during the night. Couple of other different kind of examples. This is actually my own data from last month. I was in Colorado for several weeks at a time, and this is my third week there. So no jet lag anymore, but I had moved from sort of a low altitude to a really high altitude, almost 3,000 meters. This is my data from one day, but it's split into two parts. Here is the first part of the day, routine work. I was running a workshop here actually for some of our German coaches here between 9:30 and 11 a.m. That caused a little bit of stress reactions or activation. Then I did some exercise in the middle of the day because I had started work very early in the morning, and I did a fitness level walk here in the blue and then some exercise after that. Stress levels were high after that, but what really kind of showed that I was not adjusted to this high altitude yet is that the rest of my day, despite being a very sort of relaxing, very easy, no stress kind of day, I was hanging around in the evening, reading, not doing anything stressful, a little bit of walked over to the shop in the early evening and then just stayed in my apartment. No recovery there in the evening at all, and even more than half the night stress reactions. My heart rate was clearly higher than my typical baseline, and basically my body was adjusting to this kind of a very thin air, very high altitude, and it showed up in my body as a stress reaction. And just a little bit different example, probably not something that you come across all the time, but good to understand that high altitude or jet lag or, for example, extreme heat can cause a physiological stress reaction in the body that can show up as much more red than usual in the result. Here is a very typical example that we have certainly come across a lot, a busy working mom with kids. Their example of one of the mom's days. You can see firstly that the stress peak comes here in the morning, the red lightning bolt here, and the high stress reaction. It's in the first thing in the morning before the kids go to daycare. So many people have discovered this. They comment that it looks like the kids is the most stressful thing in my life, that I always have this high stress peak first thing in the morning. And when I go to work, the stress level drops and I start recovering. Like she's getting a little bit of recovery here while doing some kind of routine work from her home. And that's, of course, very normal. The demands that little kids cause us when we have to get everyone ready to go and get their lunches packed and breakfast in and all the clothes on, it's understandable that that can cause a lot of stress reaction. Typically nothing negative about it. It's just the way it is. Same thing in the evening. She's after work here. She's playing with her kids. It can be fun, exciting, maybe good activity, but it still causes this kind of a stress reaction. And important to understand that it's not something that needs to be eliminated from the days, but then maybe again widen the scope and look at the full day. In this case, she noticed in many of her measured days that she tended to have a strong delay with her recovery. The first half her night oftentimes was red, maybe a little bit of green right at first, and then many hours of red. So meaning that her activation level was elevated. And with her, clearly one of the discussion points could be, how does she spend the hour before going to bed after the kids are asleep? Could she there develop some evening strategies and bedtime routines that instead of maybe trying to finish up all the chores that she didn't have time to do, to start kind of slowing down and getting her body ready for sleep and recovery, that might prompt better recovery for her. Overall, a very good result for her in a way, though, that she was managing to fit a nice amount of physical activity into a busy day. The light blue here means when she was walking to the daycare with her kids in the morning. And again, in the afternoon, after her remote work day, when she picked up the kids from daycare, and she managed to fit in a 30-minute gym workout close to her house. So nice way to build exercise into a busy day, knowing that she typically is not going to have that kind of an opportunity in the evening after work when the kids are at home. So many good things in this result for sure. Very different case and example here. This came up with a corporate group that I was recently working with. This was an international team leader with a very busy job, a lot going on. He had done one measurement already before this one that I'm showing here, about a month earlier. His result was quite good. Not great. He did have stressful days, but he had pretty good recovery. Then he did a second measurement, and 3 days looked pretty much like this. Just heavy, strong stress all day, all evening and no recovery even during the nighttime. You can see the stress level drops, but it still stays sympathetically dominant. The stress reactions are active. Heart rate variability, which is the gray graph here, it's very low also compared to his previous measurement. No breaks during the day, and the workday had started already at 4 o'clock. So clearly I was curious to find out what was going on. The app also sent him a notification about very poor recovery, so it identified that this is clearly not a normal situation. Turned out he was also recovering from a cold, bad cold. So he was pushing through, doing long work days. In this case, he was traveling. There was some flying and train trips on this day and then a long work day. And that, in addition to recovering from the flu, really had kind of gone overboard and his body was very, very overloaded. And we had quite of a stern discussion about that it's nothing to be super worried about, but definitely something to pay attention to because the body was reacting in a very dramatic way. Even heart rate variability was so low that for a 50-plus-year-old male, that was clearly something to be a bit concerned about. And we agreed that he would really slow down for the next week, not do any hard exercise, only some kind of light activity, and do another measurement sometime within the next few weeks to see if there was something more serious wrong, or was that just the overload caused by a lot of work and trying to push through the fact that he still wasn't quite healthy. In his case, the result looked a lot better a few weeks later. There was recovery, you can see here, during the daytime already, and sleep was a lot better, very similar to what it had been in his first measurement. But a good example that one measurement, one individual measurement of a few days in a person's life, it might give a little bit of a wrong picture if there is something going on that might really have a strong effect on the result. Like in this case, in the end, it turned out that there was nothing all that bad wrong, but at the same time, a really important reminder and red flag that we cannot just keep doing things as usual if we are sick. We have to give our body a chance to recover from that. And the data clearly showed that and also gave him a strong heads up about that. I thought I'd end with showing a good result. So this, in looking at this kind of a 24 hours of well-being, this came also from a recent project, somebody's result that I was just recently working with, a very nicely balanced result. It was a person who had really been working on his well-being in the previous 6 months, realizing that they had a new demanding role and a busy life, and they were trying to pay attention to taking some breaks, exercising enough, sleeping long enough. And he was very happy to see his result because this is a nice balance of different things. He had managed to fit in a nice amount of physical activity into a day, also between a morning of meetings and afternoon of remote working. He's getting some recovery while he's working because it wasn't a particularly stressful day, but he's also conscious of taking lunch breaks and coffee breaks. Nice little bit of exercise in the evening still. He was able to get some recovery while watching TV in the evening, and a very nice recovery. So sometimes the lessons that people learn, they're not always bad. They're not always red flags. It can be also reinforcement that, okay, the right things that I'm doing, it's actually paying off and it's causing my body to react in a good way. So oftentimes it's those kind of positive insights as well. A couple of the tools that we have built into First Beat Life is, one is these key wellness factors that the professional user, the coach, or the expert who is working with this kind of data with their clients, the wellness factors sort of automatically identify different kinds of factors from the result, either as so-called green cards or red cards or orange cards. So things that are good and strong and positive for them, and also things that are maybe the areas that they should be working on. Just some examples here. This person didn't get any red cards, so nothing that was looking extremely worrisome. This is not the previous result that I had shown. This is just somebody else. But some good reminders, for example, about sleeping long enough, having a regular sleep rhythm, some things that you might not notice from the result because there's many things to pay attention to. So the idea of these factors is to help the coach sort of identify what are the areas to work on and what are also the positives that can be reinforced. And in addition to that, if you're working with groups, we provide, or you're able to create this kind of an anonymized group report or group result to help track how the staff is doing. So if you are representing a company and would like to do this for your staff, or if you're working with corporate groups, it's important, of course, to be able to summarize how the group is doing as a whole and also follow the trends. If you're doing an intervention for 6 months, for example, to see what direction the results are going as a result of the intervention. It highlights various risk factors. It shows how many people are getting notifications about their poor result, how many people have an increased risk level, maybe because of very heavy levels of stress or very poor recovery. Also, it tracks subjective metrics, there, for example, work satisfaction and their well-being goals. So different factors of the result are tracked here, and it's fully anonymized, so the employer doesn't get any information about individual clients' results. Individuals are learning from their own result, but then this can help summarize and also focus actions to, for example, provide some additional help with sleep or provide sleep workshops, or if exercise or lack of exercise is the biggest challenge, maybe to provide some additional tools and opportunities for that. So it can help the employer focus their actions in the right way by knowing how the staff is actually doing. The idea of this 24 hours of well-being, it really comes down to this concept of load of life. We've talked before about supercompensation. That's the principle that athletes train with. If an athlete wants to improve their performance, they have to train harder than they've trained before, but they also have to make sure that there is perfect balance between the intensity and amount of training and the amount of recovery they are getting from that. If they train too hard, too often, and the recovery is insufficient, an athlete is not able to improve their performance. Or if they don't train hard enough, the same thing. And this load of life concept, in a way, it's a very similar principle, but with regular people, highlighting the importance that we can't just focus on how stressful our job is. Sometimes that could be the single most stressful part of a person's life. Other times it might be the different family demands and dynamics, or it might be a health problem with a family member or with yourself, or some kind of a mental health or psychological challenges that a person is dealing with. But the load of life kind of characterizes that idea that whatever the different demands that we have are, we need to dedicate enough recovery so that our body can handle that and we can stay healthy and bounce back from the challenges. This graph here clearly shows a situation where the load of life seems to be too heavy. The recovery line keeps going down, and there's not enough recovery, and the line doesn't really come up. The person is not able to build their resources or charge their battery, however you want to describe that. Whereas this picture shows a more balanced situation where there are, of course, stress factors in life and the resources are consumed quite a bit during the day, but the recovery is sufficient considering their situation. And this is what each person has to kind of find the right amount of load, what they can have, and also to start recognizing situations where they need to maybe slow down a little bit. So from that, I thought I would just end with a couple of thoughts about resilience. Familiar term surely to everyone, keeping in mind that it's not about toughing it out, but more about how we adapt, how we react when the going gets tough. So when there is some kind of a challenge in front of us, what do we do about it? Do we have a flexible, positive mindset that's able to adapt to that change, or do we maybe freeze and not find any means for that? Ability to focus on those things that we can do something about. So first identify what are the things in our lifestyle that we can influence, and then focus on those. A resilient person or company stays functional when they're being challenged, able to adapt and grow. And important also about resilience is that it's not a trait that you either have or you don't have. So you're born with a lot of resilience or not. Instead, it's very much a skill that can and should be practiced, both at individual and company cultural level. So of course, individual works on their own resilience, but a company who has resilient employees is going to be more resilient and able to perform better as well. I borrowed some of these ideas or paraphrased some of the ideas from this book, the book that I'm mentioning here, written by Christam Gidi and Lian Stefan. It came out this summer, and it's a great read about the resilient culture at company level and at individual level. And if you're interested in the topic, I certainly can recommend that book. Resilience is about managing our physiological and mental state, and this graph kind of highlights that. If you're looking at the arrows, the parallel line goes from negative feeling to positive feeling, and then the vertical line goes from high stress to low stress. And on the lower right quadrant, we have a situation where there is low stress level and feeling good. Maybe when you're on a holiday or on a weekend or during a particularly easy part of life, feeling sort of relaxed and calm and content. We all hope and should have sometimes these kind of periods or days or periods in life where we have this kind of situation where we don't have to constantly kind of push to perform to a high level. But the reality is that more often we are probably going to be in this situation where there is quite a lot of stress, but we are still feeling pretty good about it. It says flow here. I often would use the term regular life instead, because I think the reality is that most of our lives is probably that kind of situation where, yeah, sure, there is a lot of stress, but it's all part of life and it's all good. We're feeling sort of happy, energized, pretty good, and able to cope with that. Occasionally, we end up drifting into this zone of overload where the stress levels get so high that little by little it starts to affect how we are feeling. So the feelings are getting more, our mood is getting more and more negative because the demands are maybe too high and we no longer have the resources to deal with that. This happens occasionally as well, but this is an area where we should quickly start recognizing that I'm feeling tense or agitated or irritated all the time, tired, annoyed, and then it's time to start making some of those steps back to that flow or normal life situation. Find ways to get more of those positive feelings and away from the feeling negative. Find ways to lower the stress level, and maybe meaning cutting down some things that you are normally doing just to make sure that there is enough space for recovery. This lower quadrant is a problematic situation where if this overload situation lasts too long, it can drift into a situation where even if we are reducing the stressors in our life, the negative feeling continues to be there. We just continue to feel kind of dejected or sad or lethargic, just not able to cope with things. And this could be a situation of burnout or exhaustion, some kind of an overload where the tank is empty and you're no longer able to get up and deal with that. Obviously, this is a more serious situation that requires then professional interventions and actions for that. But the idea with these kind of measurements and the kinds of work that many of us do is, of course, to try to help people recognize the situation much earlier, finding the balance and learning to react when they realize that the load has been too heavy for too long, when the stress levels have been too high, maybe when recovery is starting to suffer, you're not being able to perform to the same level as you're used to performing. There are those moments where if we have the right kind of sensors and maybe the right kind of insights from data, where we realize that now it's time to make some corrective steps, do some preventative actions to start changing the course of our sort of balance towards the optimal level. It's very individual what it takes to do that and what that situation might be. Some people handle much heavier levels of stress, but data can certainly help people see that, and then right kind of coaching can help identify the reasonable actions for that. Because if we keep pushing through from this situation where there is some warning signs that things are not well and balanced, and we just keep sort of pushing through the brick wall or pushing through the pain, pretty soon the body can be in a situation where it's so overloaded that then it's a long road to recovery from there. And sadly, that is so common today. And that's why this kind of coaching and this kind of work is so important for individuals, but also for companies to acknowledge that a healthy workforce needs to understand these kinds of things. But I think I am going to be ending here, saying thank you for those. If anybody's in a hurry, they can leave, but I'd be happy to take questions or comments or experiences at this point. For the, I cannot allow the mics on because we have a lot of people online, but you can write your questions in the Q&A box and I'll see them from there. Let me see if there's any questions already there. I did have a couple of questions already ahead of time. Let me take one of them at first while you have a chance to write some questions. There was an interesting question about how to recognize and apply good stress to maximize the benefits. Hopefully I answered that question by showing those examples that in a way we cannot physiologically identify if it's good or bad, but we can understand the context and then we can see the recovery afterwards in the hours after that or in the following night, for example. So looking at the big picture is what helps us get to the root of the whether it's positive or negative stress, and also, of course, the person's subjective feelings. There's a question here about how can we convince the employer, how can the data help, and how can we convince the employer to use this kind of measurements? Good question. We have a webinar or clinic coming up next month that our sales guys are going to be doing, where they're going to be talking about specific sales strategies. I would just say that I think one of the better ways to convince the employer is start with the discussion that, of course, they first need to understand that a healthy workforce is going to perform better, and a workforce that is resilient and looks after their well-being, they're going to be better workers as well. We certainly can provide anonymized group reports. If you want to share those, you can show what kinds of group results the employer can get so they can understand that the individual benefits come separately for each individual. The employer doesn't access that, but that they can get those kind of anonymized summaries to understand what are the pain points within their teams or within their different groups. So that certainly is a good selling point as well, to be able to tell about that. Somebody's commenting that I like this is kind of like seems to be kind of like the missing link if I can apply data to my work with athletes and with professionals. Yeah, I agree. I think this kind of data, in many ways, it can be the missing link. It can be something that people are very unaware of. They might not be aware of how stressed out they are, or how many demands their lives really has, and what their ability to recover is. And data indeed can be like a missing link, because it can open that conversation and help that person see that they need to switch course a little bit, or ease off, or maybe even sometimes apply gas a little bit more if they're doing really well. But the data is like a peak underneath the surface with each individual. It allows very, very personalized methods and strategies that can be very powerful. There's a question here about coffee. Does drinking coffee show up as stress spikes, and is there an impact of sleep? Typically, people don't mark coffee in a journal, so we don't necessarily know when they're drinking coffee. But of course, caffeine does have an effect on the heart rate. The more used to you are drinking caffeine on a regular basis, the more used to your body probably is that. But certainly, if you have a strong cup of coffee, your heart rate is most likely going to be elevated shortly after that, and that can definitely be more likely to show up as a stress response. Or if you have a strong cup of coffee and then you do a brilliant meditation or relaxation activity right after that, it might not show up as green recovery because your heart rate is still elevated from the caffeine, and heart rate is one of the metrics that we use in the algorithm. The effect on sleep is very individual. The half time of caffeine is about 8 hours, and some people are very sensitive to that, meaning that if they have a cup of coffee at 3 p.m., half of that caffeine is still in their system about 11 p.m. And that can definitely make it difficult to go to sleep or get good sleep. Not everyone is as sensitive, but that's something to definitely discuss if a person is struggling with recovery and sleep. Their caffeine consumption habits is definitely something I would always discuss, like is alcohol. Many of the examples that we see when people have some drinks in the evening, alcohol elevates heart rate, and I'm sure many of you have seen that also with wearable devices. So caffeine and alcohol is definitely part of almost every coaching conversation that I would have with a client. Thank you. What would be your recommendation for someone who regularly wakes up at night and has difficulty falling asleep again, and then doesn't feel recovered in the morning? Yeah, tough question, because obviously those kind of sleep problems are not easy to solve. Couple of the sort of main basic things to make sure that they are in check before perhaps then checking in with a sleep specialist would be as regular a sleep rhythm as possible. That's really highlighted in all sleep research, that the more regular time you go to bed and wake up, almost very, very strictly if you're having sleep problems. So trying to not go to bed much later some nights and much earlier some nights, but really have a specific time and set your alarm to wake up in the morning at a specific time. That gives the brain the ability to learn what is your particular sort of circadian rhythm or your sleep rhythm, and it's easier to stay asleep because of that. Of course, other sleep hygiene factors like a dark room, quiet room. If you are sensitive to light, sensitive to noise, the more outside noise there is, that can definitely make it harder to stay asleep. Up here in northern climates, summertime is difficult. If there is a lot of daylight coming into the room, that can make it very difficult to stay asleep. So definitely would pay attention to all kinds of sleep hygiene factors. And of course, different mindfulness, meditation, relaxation strategies can be very powerful. So if a person wakes up, instead of getting all stressed about it, if they can learn like a 5-minute meditation or some kind of a practice that helps them, breathing exercise or something like that. So more and more people are definitely trying those kind of things to try to help with that waking up problem. I think I'll take a couple more questions here, and then we are going to be out of time. How to learn more about the program with Firstbeat? It's a good question, and since we have quite a few new coaches online or potential coaches, so just get in touch with us. I'll put on the last slide here that has our contact information. Just a second. So get in touch with customer success at firstbeat.com, for example, and they can tell you the exact step to get started. But in principle, we do have an online training course for all the new professionals that you can do on your own time. It has a bunch of short videos about how to interpret different aspects of the data and cases about different kinds of results. So that's basic starting point. We usually do arrange at least one session with our customer success and expert team, so you can ask questions from us. And then we do regularly offer different kind of clinics and webinars on key topics. So we try to listen to you and provide clinics on topics that are of interest and important. So we try to provide as much support and information for you as possible. And we have a couple of clinics coming up for our professional users still this year. You can find them in the partner website. Second, I think there was one more question I might be able to take here in the end. Lots of questions, so it's nice to see. Thank you for those. If there is somebody wrote a question and I haven't answered it, so you can always get back in touch with afterwards and we can get back to you. But yeah, by all means, get in touch with our customer success team or directly with me as well, and we'll give you the information that you need to get started. Maybe I'll finish with this one in case I somehow went through it too fast, the graphic with stress and feeling of burnout. So I think maybe she's referring to, I'll end with this one here. So this is the quadrant here where it has the question mark. It's not a clear situation what's causing that, but burnout is typically a situation where you're sort of out of gas, where even if you might not be doing much, you might be resting and relaxing and trying to take it easy, your body is still wired, your body is exhausted. So in a way, it might not be able to even kick up a typical stress response. It's not a situation that's normal because the exhaustion kind of overpowers that. And that's why from a burnout situation, it can take a long time to come back. Same as in this graphic, the idea that if we keep pushing through that kind of heavy stress too many demands, too much load for weeks and weeks on end, pretty soon if the person is in a situation where the overload is so heavy that they no longer just can cope with that, then it's not a matter of sleeping a little bit longer over the weekend. It can take months and months to get back from that. So that is the reason why we try to highlight the harmful signs of stress early enough, so the person would start noticing the problems and the risks of having too much stress and too many demands well before they are in that situation where they no longer have the energy to deal with things or the mechanisms to cope with that, and recovery can be very bad in that situation. So maybe hopefully that answers your question. Thank you very much for joining our session today, and hope you got some new insights and ideas for that. I'm looking forward to hearing from you if you have some more questions, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much. Have a good day.